Salutations to the Truth Core, whoever and wherever you may be on the planet. This is once again John Lash with the 11th installment in Mythology 101, which is a crash course in comparative mythology. The title of this talk is The Curse of the Aborted Foetus. Sounds like the title of a horror film, doesn't it? Well, actually, take a moment and look around, and you might find that in some respects, life on Earth today does resemble a horror film. But of course, that depends. That depends on how you find yourself and define yourself in the world dream we call life, relative to the dreamer. Speaking for myself, personally and transpersonally, I consider this moment to be a fabulous and unparalleled moment to be alive. Now, to kick off this talk, I'm going to read just a few lines from a speech. Now, this speech was given 100 years ago on August 15th, and it was given in a Hofbrauhaus, that is to say, a beer hall in Germany, 1920. Now, it's a long speech. Printed version actually runs to 20 pages. And I'll tell you at the end of this talk the title of this speech. But I won't say who gave it. I'll leave you to infer that yourself. So here's the quotation from the opening minutes of that speech. Excuse me if I now take a book called the Bible. I am not claiming that all its contents are necessarily true, as we know that the authors were very liberal in writing it. One thing, however, is certain. It has not been written by an anti-Semite. There's laughter in the crowd. It is very important because no anti-Semite would have been able to write a more terrible indictment against the race who produced this book than the Bible, the Old Testament. Let us take a look at this one sentence. Quote, "By the sweat of thy brow shalt thou eat bread." End quote. And it says that it was to be a punishment for the fall of man. Ladies and gentlemen, already here we see that the whole world lies between us. We could never conceive of work as a punishment. Otherwise, we would all have to have been convicts. We do not want to conceive of work as punishment. I must confess, I would not have been able to exist without work, and hundreds and thousands of millions would have been able to withstand perhaps 3 or 5 days, maybe even 10, but not 90 or 100 days without any activity of work. End quote. I don't think I have to cue you to the relevance of this statement made 100 years ago as it pertains to the situation in the world today. One of the primary effects, many would argue, one of the primary objectives of the anti-COVID measures is to demolish work, to make it impossible for people to work, to earn a living, to have a means of survival, to have a livelihood. As it stands in the world right now, as I'm recording these words, millions of people around the world are faced with the horror of not having work. But you now, informed through comparative mythology about the mythogen of the Hebrew, you would be able to see immediately that the condemnation of work is totally consistent with the mythogen of domination. The speaker in this talk goes on to say at some length that people do not merely work for survival. Of course they do, and in that respect, work is a necessity. But the moral and spiritual value of work far exceeds its survival value. Work gives purpose to human animals. There is dignity in work. There is respect, mutual respect, and there is mutual aid and cooperation in work. Think about building a bridge. Think about making shoes. A cobbler made shoes. And think about the collaboration that was required for the cobbler to acquire the leather and the thread and the needles to make those shoes. And think of the skill and the pride that went into making those shoes and getting a fair price for them and having the respect and gratitude of those who bought the shoes. And that is just one of countless examples of the moral value of work. So how does it happen that one of the sacred scriptures in the world condemns work? What kind of mentality does that demonstrate? At this point, I want to bring up a term that occurs in the Gnostic writings directed against the archons and their human proxies. It's the word phonos, P-H-T-H-O-N-O-S. And that word in Greek means envy. When you consider what envy is, it's really important to distinguish it from jealousy. They're not the same thing. For instance, I look over at my neighbor's driveway and I see a 57 Chevy parked there. And I'm jealous of my neighbor for having that Chevy, which means I would like to have what my neighbor has. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that might prove to be an inspiration to me. It might prove to motivate me to do what I can to acquire something that I desire, which happens to belong to my neighbor, but I don't want to take it away from my neighbor. I don't want to deprive my neighbor of having something that I don't have. Were I to have that emotion, that's envy. Envy is extremely destructive. If you put it in the context of work, you could say this: well, I want to work. I like to work. I enjoy work. It not only provides me with a livelihood so that I can feed and clothe and shelter myself and others, but it gives me purpose and dignity. I earn respect from others, and my self-respect grows according to the way I perform in my chosen work, or even in work that I do not choose, work that I must assume by necessity, and I have done plenty of that in my life, building houses, mowing fields with big swathers with 10-foot carriages, picking rocks in potato fields. I could go on and on. I've done plenty of hard work in my life that I didn't necessarily choose to do, but nevertheless that work brought me the same results: pride and self-respect. So, there's my neighbor, and suppose he or she has an attitude, or maybe even a worldview, that dictates that they don't work. Maybe they just don't like to work. They don't enjoy work. Or maybe they have a mandate through their belief system that tells them that they don't have to work, because if they're clever and deceptive, they can live off the labor of other people and they can exploit people who work. That's not the kind of neighbor you want to have, is it? But it gets worse. It would be not acceptable, really, but let's say it would be marginally tolerable if my neighbor is a slacker who doesn't want to work. So I leave my neighbor to his own devices as long as his refusal to work or his distaste for work doesn't affect me. But you see, it's not like that in the horror of the world today. Because those who do not work, legitimately and genuinely work and bring a contribution to the social order, also want to deprive those who do work of every opportunity to do so. So those who do not work are envious. And the MO of envy is to take away from others that which you do not have, and even to destroy their opportunity to have something. That's envy. And the Gnostics warned in no uncertain terms, here and there throughout the Greek Coptic writings, that envy is the signature of the archons, Phthonos. So the extraterrestrial archons look into this experiment from their platform on Saturn. They use their high frequency wavelength faculties to surveil. They remote view the human species in this divine experiment on this planet. And they cannot be like us. And they envy us. So consequently, they want to make it impossible for us to live in the way that we naturally like to live. That's envy, distinguished from jealousy. Let's return for a moment to the sacred text of the Old Testament cited in this speech. You can say that the line quoted represents a curse. And as a matter of fact, that is the exact language in use in this text. The Creator God, Yahweh, of the Hebrew, put a curse on the human races. And according to this curse, well, three things that human animals normally experience are cursed, and they are to be regarded as undesirable. So you can infer that these three things, these three actions, are undesirable to those who are obedient to the Archon Overlord. It was a triple curse pronounced by Yahweh upon the human races. It was not a curse pronounced upon the Hebrew or the progeny of the Elohim. They don't tell you that in Sunday school, do they? At least they didn't tell me that in Friendship, Maine, those many years ago. It's a triple curse. So what are the other two elements of the curse? There's a curse on work. There's a curse on childbirth. You shall suffer pain in childbirth. And there's a curse on death. In other words, the Old Testament pronounces the judgment of the Archonic Overlord that death is bad. It's a curse to die. Well, you can infer from that somebody who adopts this agenda, who adopts this scripture as a guiding program, somebody believes that there's something wrong with death, with dying. Fast forward to today. Have you ever heard it said regarding the so-called COVID-19 pandemic that these extreme measures must be taken because if just one person died of COVID and we could prevent it, that would be one death too much? Have you heard this reasoning? I'm sure you have. We cannot allow the risk that even one person could die if it were preventable. Can you see behind that rationale and that insane demand, which is the pretext for enforcing insane measures upon the public? Can you see behind that statement the mindset of those who believe that death is something bad? Death is not natural. We should be able to live here in this experiment without anyone dying. It sounds absurd, and it is absurd. But another thing that the Gnostics said, this is a passage from the second treatise of the great Seth, which I have often stated, and those who plotted against us did so in the power of their senselessness and absurdity. The plan against us, the Gnostic revealers, is based on senselessness and absurdity. It actually says that in the Nag Hammadi writings. You see? It's absurd to say, to demand, and to enforce a program to shut down the entire world against the risk that one death from an alleged virus, which has never been proven to exist, could be prevented. Where does this mentality come from? Well, now you know. And you know where it comes from originally and absolutely. It doesn't come from anywhere else. It's not a mindset to be found in any other culture, in any other mythological narrative, in any other religious or metaphysical belief system. No, no, no. It is a mindset unique to the Archontic program that is written in the Hebrew file. Now, bear with me while I comment a little bit more, a few minutes, on the triple curse in the book of Genesis, before I get to the dicey subject of the aborted fetus. Look at each one of these curses. They are against something. Against work, against childbirth or procreation, and against death. Clear enough? The way you can read it is directly, and this is not reading something that is not there. This is reading actually what it says. The Archonic Overlord proclaims that these three experiences of the human species are undesirable. They represent a curse that Yahweh places on the human races, but not on the Elohim. And at the same time, they represent or they suggest that these three experiences can be overcome and ought to be overcome. Do you see the inference? Let's look at that for a minute. What kind of mindset, program, or agenda wants to overcome procreation? Well, remember Brave New World? Remember that story about children being born in incubators rather than in the wombs of their mothers? Remember many other stories and science fiction tales that develop that motif. Now look at IT. Look at the claims, which are actually threats, which are actually groundless and insane, coming from the transhumanists. Oh yes, we don't have to produce any more. Biological production of the human species by meiosis is unnecessary. We'll replace it all with technology. Biotechnology will take over natural propagation. It's insane, but in a way, it's the final and logical consequence of that particular curse. Same goes for the curse on death. Oh, well, we don't really need to die. For one thing, we could upload our consciousness into a computer. And then when we physically died, we could continue to live as an immortal being in cyberspace. Or, then there's cryonics. You don't have to die. When the time comes that you might die, we'll just freeze you, and then we'll resurrect you in a few years or 100 years, when we have developed the technology that allows us to keep people alive without ever dying. Who wants to keep people alive without ever dying? And who exactly do they want to keep alive? So you have the transhumanist ideal, if you can call it that, of immortality. And there it is, written in the script, in the Hebrew file, on the first fucking page. And if that's not enough, how about I hit you with this one, like a cold mackerel across the chops? A book came out a few years ago. It's called Homo Deus. It's Latin, which means the God-man, the immortal man. The author of this book is an Israeli psychologist, I think. Maybe he's a doctor or a biochemist. I don't exactly know. And he is a worldwide best-selling author. And I started to read this book. I do it so you don't have to. I have to say I couldn't get very far in it. But I remember in about the 10th page, there's this line where he says, oh yeah, death and disease. Well, we've seen so much progress in biotechnology and medicine, led primarily by you-know-who, in the recent years that it's obvious we're on a trajectory where we're not only going to be able to cure all illnesses and genetic defects and everything you can think of, but we're also going to be able to cure death. A couple of nerds in a laboratory can do that. That's a quote from the book. A couple of nerds in a laboratory tinkering around with a genetic code can do that. The plan which they launched against me, the revealer, is based on absurdity and senselessness. In that quotation, by the way, it is a revealer speaking, capital R. What is a Gnostic revealer? Well, the Greek word is phoster, P-H-O-S-T-E-R, from phosphorus. So it means a light bringer, like Lucifer, a word which has been unfortunately subverted and perverted and demonized. These fiends of transhumanism are often called Luciferians or Luciferian Satanists. They certainly are Satanists in the sense that the word Satan means adversary. So you can use the word Satan or Satanist without a capital letter, and when you do so, I advise you strongly that you do not have to imagine in your mind that there is some kind of actual supernatural satanic being called Satan or Lucifer. There is no such being. Yaldabaoth is not Satan, but the program and plan of the archons is a satanic program, because satanic means adversarial. So in the sense that the archonic program and the mythogen of the Hebrew is against all of the human races and all natural life on earth, it is indeed satanic. As far as Luciferian goes, the Gnostic teachers were the true Luciferians, the fosters, the revealers. The true Luciferians are those who have seen aletheia, the truth. And the truth is material. And they have seen that material luminosity. And they are the agents and teachers of that luminosity. So in the true and benevolent sense of the word Luciferian, I'm a Luciferian. But I'm certainly not a Luciferian in the slurred and confused use of that word by many people who are well-intentioned, but miseducated and ignorant regarding the deeper foundation of these terrible, terrible matters that we are facing. Bit of a digression there. But back to the point, the second curse, the third curse, how can you curse death? What's wrong with dying? Dying is a part of life. You know, Timothy Leary said, death is the greatest trip of all. That's why they save it for last. Or he's credited with saying that. I think it's just a joke saying out of the 60s. But the very presumption, the very insanity of trying to exclude death from the world is truly a horror. And the globalist masterminds, including Klaus Schwab, Elon Musk, Ray Kurzweil, Bill Gates, all of them, all of those billionaires who think they can stand there on the platform of the world stage and tell everyone else how they have to live, are enacting this insane curse. The archontic mythogen is against natural procreation. The natural, sexual, and amatory encounter of male and female of the human species. And while I'm on male and female, I would also point out that the specific language in the sentence which says that Yahweh created the Elohim and then Adam came from the Elohim, Adam, uses a language that says male and female, he created them, the Elohim. Well, that phrase, that exact language in the biblical verse has been very, very much disputed. And there are two ways of looking at that. As a matter of fact, in the true scenario, you, as a member of the human species, come from a genome which is designed on a sexual dyad. Okay? So the human genome in meiotic reproduction, which occurs from the sexual conjugation of a male and female animal, can result in a male or female progeny. And that's natural, and that's inherent to the divine design of the anthropos. However, what you find in that line in Genesis is a concealed, lying perversion about the sexual dyad, male and female. He created them. That tiny phrase contains the germ of a terrific and destructive deceit. And the deceit concerns transsexualism, which again is a major factor in the program of the technocrats and the globalist masterminds, isn't it? So their program of transsexualism is contained in the fine print of that mythogen. Remember, the Elohim, the archons, produced the Adamic race, and that is the Hebrew, not all of the other human races. And so, concealed in the fine print, this is what it says. Well, ultimately, the Elohim are androgyne, male and female. And that would also apply for the Adamic race, which, as you now know, designates those seemingly human beings like you and I, who are in fact not human, but belong to the superspecies. So those humanoid or human-like animals living among us, who don't actually belong to our species, carry a program with the intention to decimate and destroy the gender binary that is natural to our species. And you see, everywhere you look, the evidence of that program being enacted, and you don't have to look far, or you don't have to turn over too many rocks to see exactly who is promoting and enforcing that program of transgenderism, the LGBT madness, the sexual perversion of children at the age of 3 and 4 by the introduction of alternative lifestyles of sexuality as if they were better than the lifestyle of the gender binary. Well, I don't want to pound you into the ground with this exposition. I am certain that you can make all the inferences that you need to make to draw from this material, to draw from this trope of the triple curse, to see that that curse is actually being enacted upon humanity today. It is part of the Great Reset. It is part of the whole technocratic, globalist attempt to take over the world and commit the greatest crime against humanity that has ever been conceived. And they're not getting away with it. They think they are, but they're not. So here in my concluding talks about the Hebrew mythogen and comparing it to the Sophianic mythogen of the Gnostics, I have picked out a couple of more points that come to light as you set those two files side by side and compare them. And as I said, there is no other instance in world mythology, no other clear and coherent instance that provides as much evidence as these two cases do of mythogens that are locked in a mortal conflict. Sure, you can find in Hindu mythology references to the Avestan mythology of the Persians, particularly concerning the matter of the Devas and the Asuras. So you find the Devas and the Asuras represented in one way in Persian myth, another way in Hindu myth, and they sort of refer to each other. And some of the significance is reversed. But this is an example of a rare number of cases where one body of mythological narrative that is race-specific will refer to another, but it doesn't even come close to what's happening between the Hebrew file and the Sophianic file. The Gnostics nailed it. They said that the primary characteristic or mark of the archons is envy. They said that they are messengers of deception, which is also the exact phrase that Jacques Vallée used in his magnificent trilogy on the ET UFO enigma. They said that they thrive on deceit, on leading astray, on perverting, on subverting. They said that the archons feed on fear. It is their food. Fear has the aroma that they like to smell. Of course, they can't smell because they can't breathe. And they don't breathe. And they don't see either. What's behind those black oval-shaped bug eyes is shortwave radio frequency sensors, not eyes. They have no organs. However, on the basis of Gnostic intel, which I've developed over many years using the shamanic practice of the Gnostics themselves, I ascertained that the bodily composition of archons is silicon and mercury. Mercury sort of operates as their lymphatic system. Now, the subject of Mercury brings me to the closing point of this talk, indicated in the title of the talk. Among the many extraordinary elements in the Gnostic writings that refer forward vividly to the horror facing the world today, one that stands out, most certainly, one that will get your attention, is the Huhe. It's all about the Huhe. Now, this is a Coptic word, and it's very strange. And I suppose it is literally a Coptic word in the Coptic language. But when you find it in those Nag Hammadi codices, you find something that cannot be found in any other mythology anywhere in the world. Now, it is true that some creation myths, such as that of the Quiché Maya, which I cited, some creation myths, several in fact, will say that the gods tried to create the human beings, the first people, which refers to the people who are producing the myth, not to the entirety of the human species. But those myths will say, yeah, they tried to create the first people, our primal parents, but it failed. They were made of mud and it rained and they fell apart. Or other stories like that to exist. So there is a motif of the failure of the creation of the first people. But that's nothing like what I'm telling you about here. What is the Huhe? It means abortion or aborted fetus. Listen to this passage from the Hypostasis of the Archons, which is also translated as the reality of the rulers. A veil exists between the world above, the Pleroma, and the realms that are below, the Kenoma, and shadow came into being beneath the veil, that is the boundary of the Pleroma. Some of the shadow became matter and was projected apart. And what Sophia created became a product in the matter, like an aborted fetus. End quote. Did you catch that last line? Do you want to know who created the archons? Just asking for a friend. Well, your divine mother created the archons by a mistake. It was a mistake. It was an anomaly. It was an unanticipated side effect of her fall. You see, in the Hebrew myth, adopted by Christians all around the world, you see the dominant theme of the fall, don't you? The triple curse comes with the fall. Adam and Eve disobeyed the Creator God, and they were cursed for it. What is the opposite theme in Gnostic myth? It's the fall of the wisdom goddess herself. There is no fall of man in Gnostic teaching. There is a far higher and more sublime story of the fall of the wisdom goddess. And as a consequence of that fall, that plunge from the pleroma, the archons arose by accident. There is a line in the Gospel of Philip that says, the world system that you inhabit came about due to an anomaly. Can also be translated due to a mistake or a transgression. That would be her transgression of the pleromic boundary. So you see, I know it's hard for some to take, and I have no doubt that some people cannot find their way into the beauty and power of the Sophianic narrative due to that single factor. It describes a divine being who makes a mistake. It describes something that happens in the cosmic order that is not under the control of the gods. Why not? Because freedom is fundamental to the cosmic order, even to the level of the gods. And that means freedom to make a mistake, freedom to produce an unattended, unanticipated side effect of something that has been done. So finally, it's getting late in the night here, and this talk is running on longer than I would care. But here I am, a little after midnight, sipping on a White Russian. And the moment has come to talk about the vaccine. I have in my hand a copy of the language on the vaccine produced by the company AstraZeneca. And it says that this vaccine is, I quote, a diploid human cell culture line composed of fibroblasts originally developed from research deriving lung tissue of a 14-week-old aborted Caucasian male fetus. So in case you didn't know already, the vaccine for the virus that doesn't exist, quantum 19, contains material from an aborted fetus. Figure it. And not only that, but remember what I just said about the bodily composition of the archons. Mercury. Vaccines also contain mercury. Can it be any clearer than that? When the Gnostics warned about the consummation of the work of the archons, That's exactly what they were talking about. This vaccine. It is the archontic Eucharist. And its purpose is not to heal anyone or protect anyone or save even a single life. Its purpose is to maim and kill. Okay, Lash, so what's the good news? Well, the good news, my friends, is that at the moment that they come to the consummation of their work, the moment when the transhumanists and technocratic fiends are in their end game, when that moment comes, then the curse of the aborted fetus also comes to be fulfilled. So what is the curse? Well, not in his image, I discussed it at length. And I called it the victim-perpetrator syndrome. What you know by now, and there are not many on this earth who know this, is that the Hebrew mythogen is the platform for the Jewish God complex. But that complex carries a curse upon the very people who believe that they are chosen to achieve it. When you look at the narrative that unfolds from the Hebrew mythogen, what do you see? You see the children of Abraham and the chosen tribe, favored and exalted by the Dementic Archon Father God, but also tested for their obedience. The tribe of the chosen ones, the progeny of the aborted fetus, are born in a state of cognitive dissonance relative to their own God. Do you know that Israel means struggle with God? By preserving their mythogen over these millennia and acting it out in the world drama, they are condemning themselves to the ultimate fate of anyone who suffers from the victim-perpetrator syndrome. But they're not just anyone, are they? Don't take my word for it. Go and ask one of them. And because they're not just anyone, and due to the grandiosity of their mythogen, they are due to suffer the consequences of the victim-perpetrator syndrome on a scale unknown to any other people on this earth. For centuries, they have played the same game. They have enjoyed the role of perpetrators, parasites, upon all the other races, and simultaneously they have enjoyed the role, and they do enjoy it, of being the victim, the innocent scapegoat of all the other races. Now I ask you, and it is really me asking you, how much longer do you think that's going to continue? How much longer will you allow it to continue? Enough said, and I'll be seeing you in the beauty to come.